Hi everyone, this is Joseph again from Nigeria. I want to thank you guys for participating in my last video where I was talking about myself, and I felt the love, and I'm really grateful for that. Alright, this tutorial is meant for those people who are starting up Cinema 4D, who are starting up 3D software, and they've downloaded this software and they don't know how to go about it. And I feel the first thing we need to know about this software is when we are comfortable with the interface, and every other thing should be fine for us. So for this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about the interface of Cinema 4D. Alright, so when you open Cinema 4D, you have your menu bar here where you run the normal native command of saving, creating new files, and edit and all that. Then still you are going to find some menus that are particular for this software, and they are very well explanatory. Now coming down to this menu bar, the normal menu bar, I call this a quick access toolbar. The reason why I call this quick access toolbar is because if I am to create something from my menu bar, I go to create, I go to object, then let's assume I want to create a cube, I'll go to cube. I have a cube here. Now you can notice how many clicks I've had to create this, but for me to create the same cube, I can just come to this bar here, click on this toolbar, then I have the cube. Now if I click and hold down, I'm going to have every other object that I want. Just come to the other one I want, then release my hand from on it, I have the object created. Hope you understand that. So this allows me to create this object easily without having to have a lot of clicks. So I get to have fewer clicks when creating with this quick access toolbar, as I call it. Now coming to the right hand side, I have my objects manager. The object manager gives me a list of objects that I have in the scene. So if you look at it, I have two objects in my scene, and the list of the objects are here. I have the sphere and I have the cube. Alright, so if I'm to create a new object, let's assume I'm to create a figure. Now the figure, after creating this figure, I have the figure added to this list. Now you can notice that as I am creating this object, the last object created is placed at the top in the hierarchy. That's a setting in Cinema 4D. If you want to change it, you can change it. So the setting is that every new object that I create should be at the top in the hierarchy, or any new object I copy should also be at the top in the hierarchy. But if I'm to change that in the preference, I'll go to the edit, go to the preferences. Now in your interface tab, you can see, coming down to this interface tab, you see insert new object at top, paste new object at top. If I'm to change this, and let's assume I want to change it to root, for instance, if I change it to root, what will happen is that any new object that I create now will be placed as a parent of the object that I had last. So if I come here and I change this from root to, let's say, what do we, top, previous, next, and okay, if I choose next and I click on OK, close. Now if I'm to create a new object, I'm going to see I have this, then create a new object, cylinder is next to it in the hierarchy. Do you understand that? So after creating this, I create a cylinder. Now if I'm to select cube and I create a new object, what will happen is that the new object will be placed next to it in the hierarchy. So any object you have selected before creating a new object will be placed next to it under in the hierarchy based on these settings that I have next to the object. So I'm going to take it back to the top so we understand that. So the same thing applies to pasting of an object. So if I'm to paste an object, any options I choose here will also go. So let me delete some objects here, and I'm going to need some, I think. Okay, so I have this, I have this sphere, I don't need this, and I don't need that. So let's go with these three objects. Alright, so that is the setting for that. Another thing you can see in this attribute, in this object manager, is that coming to the side of this object created, you have some buttons here. You have the check marks. These check marks are to enable the object in the viewport and to disable. So if I'm to click on this checkbox for the torus and have X, that means it has been disabled from my drawing. If I come here, or from my scene rather, if I enable it, click on that, I have it back. Notice if I'm to disable this sphere, all I need to do is just click on the check on the mark sign, then that goes away, then that comes back. Now another thing you can also find is you have two dots here beside the checkbox on each of the objects. Now these two dots are applicable for visibility of the object both in the viewport and in the renderer. So I don't mean to get too much on your head, but over time you understand what rendering means and all that. Now in the viewport, every first of this button will mean something in the viewport. The next one is the renderer. Now I have three states. I have the default state, which is obviously visible. If I click on it first time, I have the green state, which means it should always be on in the viewport. If I click on it another time, then I'm going to have a red state, which means it should be invisible in the viewport. You can notice that I do that, it goes invisible in the viewport. Now if I click on it again, so I'll go to the default state, and the default state is that it should be visible. Now this setting can be seen in your basic tab of any object you have selected. So if I have this object selected, I have different tabs. Can you see I have different tabs pertaining to that object? So if I'm to go to the torus, for instance, I go to the basic tab, I have the visibility here, and I have the enable. The checkbox is for this check mark is for the is for enabling the object. So notice what will happen to this checkbox. If I disable this object here, the checkbox goes away. So that means this is not enabled. If I want to enable it, I can come here, click on it again, that goes back. Now talking about this sign, this is the visibility in the editor that I was talking about, and visibility in the renderer. These are the two dots. So if I check this, you notice it goes on when the thing turns green. You can notice that. Now if I click on it one more time, it goes off when it turns red, and if I click on it, it goes to the default. So we have three states. Default obviously is visible, the green state is always visible, and the red state is invisible. So that makes sense. Alright, this other button is for the layers. We'll talk about the layers later. Now over time, as you're working, you'll be putting objects in layers to make work easier for you. Now coming down here, we have the attribute manager. Now the attribute manager gives you an attribute of any object, or the property of any object you have selected. This attribute manager changes based on any object you have. So if I'm to select, notice what happens to the tab here. If I'm to select sphere, my tab reduces to 4, and it's giving me information based on the tab. If I'm to select cube, I still have the same 4, but it's giving me information. Now I will not see the information now until I go to the object tab. So every object in my scene should have a tab that gives you property of that object. Sorry, excuse me. So if I'm to go to the torus, I have ring radius for the torus. You can see that I have ring radius, I have the ring segment. You would not see this now, I'm going to explain this later. Now you notice what happened. The segment is the wires that make up these objects, but we'll go into this later on. We have the pipe radius. So you see that this is having effect on that. Then you can change the orientation of this torus by clicking on this. So if I want to switch the orientation, just click, that changes. If I'm to go to Z, it changes. So based on what orientation you want, you choose that. Then you have another tab called slice. Slice allows you to do all done. So these are just tabs giving you the property of that object. So if I'm to come to this sphere, I'm going to have a different property for the sphere. I can increase this. I can change the type of wires that makes up the sphere, the type of sphere. And I come to the cube, I can also change the X length, I can change the Y length or size, and I can change the Z size of this sphere. And that is what the attribute manager does. It gives you the attribute of that. Now if you come, you will see the name attribute here. Now you also have the layer tab. Now this is what I was talking about, the layer. I don't have any layer yet, so I don't have this. I have this grayed out, but by the time you start creating layers and putting objects into layers, you will better appreciate what this does. Now coming to this object, you also have the take tab, you have your content browser tab, you have the structure tab. So we're going to get into this in a later video. Now coming down here, you have your animation bar on the timeline. This is for animation purpose. You can see the scroll wheel for that. You can see the start frame and the end frame of the animation. Then you have your animation buttons, basically to play, to go to the start, to the end, to the previous, to the next, and so on. Now you also have your transform manager here that allows you to move the objects in different position, to scale the object, and also to rotate the object. Now coming down, you have the material manager. This material manager is where you create materials and add to objects. So if I'm to create material, 3 different materials, and just give them a random color, okay, so I have all the materials here. Now I don't see the effect of these materials on this object because they are not applied to the object. So if I'm to drag it and drop on this object, start seeing the materials applied to the object. So this is where you create your materials and you apply them to the object. Now coming to this left hand side, I call this the mode buttons, or the mode icon buttons. Now the reason why I call this is because it allows me to change objects from different mode or from different states. I also have the snap button here, so later in the future we're going to go into that deeply. Now if you come to this big bar where you have the object that I'm created, this is called the scene or the viewport. So now this scene or the viewport is what holds everything that I'm creating visually. So I have this represented in 2 places, in my object manager and also in my scene. Now the object manager only gives you a list of what you have created, while the scene or the viewport gives you the objects that you have created, but in a visual way, the way you have them arranged, the way you position all these things. While for this object manager is just a list of these objects. Now if you look at the objects in this viewport rather, you can see 4 buttons at the top here. The first one allows me to pan, allows us to pan. It's just like I'm moving up, down, left and right. Just I'm moving the camera up, down, left and right. Now the next one allows me to zoom in and zoom out, like I'm moving the camera away from the object and closer to the object. I have a third one which is called the orbit key that allows me to tumble, or I call it orbit, allows me to move and see what is behind and under and at the top of the object. Then I now have the 4th button which does a whole lot of, it does many things actually, but the first thing it does in this kind of view is to split my screen. So if I'm to click this, it splits the screen into 4 different screens. Now what is happening here is that, let me go back here. 3D software is created in such a way that you have different cameras positioned at different locations. So if I'm to look at this same object that I've created in a particular view, I can go to that view. If I'm to go to, let's say for instance, the front view of this and see what I can see in the front view, I can go to the front view. If I want to see what is visible at the top, I can go to the top. How that makes sense. So if I'm to click this, it gives me the different view. You can see the name here, perspective view. I have the top view, I have the right view, and I have the front view. So this is telling me that if I'm to go to the front, this is what I will see. So the front is somewhere here. This is what I am going to see. If I'm to go to the right view, which is here, this is what I'm going to see. If I'm to go to the top, this is what I'm going to see. So I also have all these buttons here in each of these views. So basically, for me to maximize a particular view, all I need to do is just go to that view I want to work on, click on that fourth button, then it maximizes that view. And if I'm to click on the fourth button again, it takes me back to the split screen. Click on this, it takes me back there. I hope you understand that. Alright, so basically that is all about the interface, how you can navigate what each of these tabs, what they do, the managers. But then I don't usually work using these buttons because it takes a whole lot of time working with this. So if I'm to do something here and I want to tumble, I have to come here, it takes my time. So but there are shortcuts that we can use to do that. Now the one I use often, the one I use most of the time, I'm going to do that last, but I'm going to start with the old shortcut that came with Cinema 4D. Now when I started at the time I started Cinema 4D, I only had this shortcut. The new shortcut I don't think was there. If I'm correct, please, if I'm wrong, please, I stand to be corrected, please. But then what I used was this number, streams of number. If I'm to hold down my number 1 key and I left mouse and I press down the left button of my mouse, it will allow me to pan. You can see I'm holding down number 1 key and I am pressing down the left button of my mouse. I'm able to pan, move up, down, left and right. Now if I hold down the number 2 key on my keyboard and I press down the left mouse button still, it will allow me to zoom in and zoom out, zoom in, zoom out, like I'm dialing in and out of the camera. Then if I hold down the third number 3 key on my keyboard, press down the left mouse still, it will allow me to tumble or to orbit around that. So this is how I started Cinema 4D. But later, when the later version came up, I stumbled on these shortcuts and made life very easy for me. So I don't have to be looking for number 1, number 2, number 3. I can as well as just put my hand on a button and change between the 3 different buttons on my keyboard. So the button is Alt key. So if I'm to hold down my Alt key and I press down the left mouse button, I will rotate or orbit around the object. If I have the Alt key still selected and I press down the middle mouse button, I will pan. If I have the Alt selected still and I press down the right mouse button, you know what it does? It zooms in and zooms out. So this is what I use. Just hold down the Alt and change between the buttons on your mouse. Then you have that. Alright, so I think that's about that. Now this is just to give us an overview of the interface of the software so that you can get comfortable with the software. Now later I'm going to start off the tutorial, just like I said in my previous video, that I'm going to start off a series of tutorial, and hopefully next tutorial is going to be talking about the primitives and how to use the primitives to create simple objects. And if you like this tutorial and you've learned something, please, I would like you to give a thumbs up to it, and please do subscribe to my channel as we grow together. Thank you very much.